So this is on the Bachmann Spectrum heavyweight passenger cars. Primarily, he's covering installing new LED lightings and the wiring connections to the trucks, and also improving the coupler boxes. If you're familiar with these cars, they have a pivoting coupler, which is kind of hokey. You may have different methods that work, as this changes won't completely eliminate all lighting problems because they only pick up power from one side of each metal truck. Because the part of the truck bolster is metal, you cannot isolate pickup from one side to another for full side power pickup. So these are the older Spectrum lighting heavyweights. It replaces the interior wiring and installed LED lighting. Replacing the trucks is also an option. He didn't like the lights flickering. Elimination of the contact springs inside the car may not be relevant to your car, but if you have them or open the car frequently, they will fail. They lose their spring. If you haven't removed the roof before, you can turn the car upside down and locate the 6 clear locator tabs, which are part of the window roof assembly. Note that the roof and windows separate along the roof line and the walls stay attached to the frame. I believe this is similar to the River Rossi. You start at one end and gently push down on the tab slightly on opposite sides with your fingers or a small screwdriver and gently pull them apart. And you work from one end to the other. When you put the roof back, it only goes one way. So if it's not going back together, flip it around. He's showing here the location of the release tabs and showing the roof line coming up. Don't pry with a screwdriver along the roof line or you'll damage it. Like I mentioned, these are very similar to the River Rossi I8C type cars that I'm a little bit familiar with, and the window and roof is all one piece, molded in clear plastic, and then the roof is painted. And the clear styrene tends to be much more brittle and tend to crackings. So you have to be careful with it. And you can see here as toothpicks show the release points. They're showing the interior, the location of the screws that hold the seating and floor section in. This is a good time to paint the interior and add details, get some passengers in there. You remove the spring contacts from the clear window assembly. You see them on the side here. Well, you can see over here the contact inside the car body that little spring contacts. Much better if you can solder or wire that directly. Showing the truck disassembled. Once you take it apart, he says you can see inner workings for lighting the car. There's the 2 truck side frames, the 2 truck cover assemblies, 2 tiny Phillips screws per truck side, the center bolster with a square top, and electrical contact with the solder tab. He found that the solder tab was loose on the truck frame. This was the only problem you might get by checking to see that the side frame Phillips screws have the truck secured to the bolster assembly. This could work and could be a quick fix to just tighten the screws. The outer truck needs to be very gently pried away from the truck frame. Only do that on the side that has the electrical tab on it. If you pry unevenly, you can break those tabs. You pry very gently and evenly at the pins. Too much pressure and you will bend or break off the guide pins. There are 2 versions of the 3 guide pin piece that covers the 2 outside screws that hold the truck together. To give you an idea of the size of this part, that appears to be a toothpick. You can try different tools for cleaning up this painted metal. You'll note the trucks have been painted completely on both sides and on the bolster frame, as well as the tapered axle bearing surface. Use a number 11 blade to scrape it off. You may have other tools to be able to do this, such as a scratch brush or small wire brushes. Don't overdo it. This is soft metal. Just be sure the electrical tab is clean on both sides before reassembly. You may also want to use a dab of CA glue on the bolster top and electrical tabs so it won't work loose again. I'd like to add here that fiberglass scratch brush, Micromark sells them. They are very good for cleaning up an electrical contact surface because they're gentle and abrasive, and with the bristles it can kind of get around indentations and stuff, so those would be an excellent choice for cleaning up the electrical contacts. You should also apply a very small dab of goo or goop to the 3 pins of the cover assembly. Goop is an alternative to Walthers Goo. Walthers Goo is costly and it's a substituted Goop for many years. If you're not familiar with Goop, it is very similar to E6000 or Shoe Goo. It's a clear adhesive. It's fairly thick. It's probably thicker than Walthers Goo. It sticks almost anything to anything. And this is advice I've seen before, is put Vaseline on the threads of the tube so you don't glue the lid on. And then you just squeeze it so it makes a little bulge, and you just take like a number 11 blade and you just sort of scrape off that dome and adhesive to get a small amount of adhesive on the knife. Like I said, it's very thick. What I have instead is E6000, which is identical, just slightly different viscosity. Here he started cleaning for reassembly. You notice he's cleaned out the pivot points for the axles and the side frames. So you remove all the electrical tape, spring assemblies, and the light bulb. Springs get bent and misshapen, so it's not a very good design. Contact connector is showing us falling away. Notice how the underframe components are melted inside versus gluing them in place. That was a common technique with some of these cars. Rather than gluing parts together, they would just have a tab and they would melt it over to hold things in place. So he's saying solder in new connectors or splice or shrink wrap connections. Repair this issue, we will remove the T's and springs and splice in additional wires. This is what he did on his earliest cars. Now he just replaces the wires from the electrical contact on the trucks and use one-piece wiring up to the new LED lighting. Just remember to have enough wire length to go from the truck up to the LED strip and be able to remove the roof. Leave enough space on the closest truck to the LED to install your dropping resistors. This shows the pieces to be removed to install the LEDs. So remove the incandescent bulb. Beware the existing light may have deformed the plastic. Sitting on DCC powered siding, after 4 hours they are very warm. Others have had it deform the roof of the car. Started out cutting 3-element LED strips into 3 strips each and soldering them with the power wires in between. It turns out to be more work than necessary. You can just cut the LED strip to the nearest size that'll fit inside the car roof. Here's what he does now. It's better to have the full length of LED strip so the adhesive will stick to the existing clear light diffuser. The club isn't heated, so the room gets cold at night, so it causes the LED segments to droop. Also, he may not have cleaned it thoroughly enough, and soldering temperatures can degrade the adhesive. He used a 1K in series with 1 lead just to get the light level he wanted with DCC track voltages. He makes it that point that I'd like to add. These LED light strips are running on 12 volts or on a rectified DCC voltage, which is pretty close to 12 volts. They're probably way too bright for lighting the interior of a car or a structure. The additional series resistance will help dim them down quite a bit. You can find them on eBay and Amazon. They're 5 meters long, groups of 3 LEDs. Compared to Micromarks are way overpriced. They're probably exactly the same thing. They're available in different brightness levels. You can get them in cool white, warm white, several other shades. Each segment, whether 3 or 6 LED segment pieces, only need an applied voltage source and not a bridge rectifier element. You can cut them to size along scissor marks, and they have the necessary components to regulate the voltage. He's putting the DCC 80 voltage on the strips, so he's not feeding them DC, he's feeding them AC. Since they are diodes, they conduct on one half cycle and not on the other. Since there are 3 LEDs in series with the resistor in series also, the reverse voltage is not going to hurt them. You can see they have the little scissor symbol where you can cut these apart. And when you cut them, you want to cut as close to dead center so that you have as much solder pad as possible on each side to solder leads to these. If you know you're going to discard one end and just throw it away, then you can cut farther from center to give yourself a little more solder pad. These are 8 millimeters wide, so they're about the width of the diameter of a pencil. Here he shows the installation. This is the version where he's cut them apart and connected them with wires. Remember that in newer version, he does not cut them apart. So he's showing it with the seating removed and the weight in place. The best way is to route the wires underneath the metal floor plate. Just be careful you don't pinch the wires. You can route them above the metal plate, below the floor plate. You have to maneuver around the floor mounting screws. Just don't route them anywhere near the locking tabs for the roof. If the full length segments are too bright, you can add more resistance to your particular car. If they aren't the right color, you can always apply a light coating of diluted paint to your color you are trying to get. A mild yellow will look like an incandescent. To me, it makes a clear colored paint that are perfect for that application. So you lay out your electrical components and wiring before you make any final connections. Remove the screws that hold in the clear light diffuser. Remove the bulb and electrical tape. Clean off the tape residue. Cut your LED strip to fit. You don't need full length, and you do not want any part of the LED Becker tape not making contact with the clear light diffuser. Install a resistor in the vestibule. Cut black craft paper and glue a piece over each window. They're small enough that they seem okay blacked out. The wire length could be hidden in the end, and the roof and windows easily removed while remaining connected. He also glued 2 removable partitions in place, and he found very little flicker from these changes. You could also install an electrolytic capacitor or small keep alive. I would question that adding the electrolytic capacitor because this is AC. You would need to add a diode. He uses a full-length single piece of the strip so that he eliminates the soldering of wires between the strips. So now he's going into the coupler movement system. If you have tight radiuses, you may want to just leave it as is. If you have lots of hilly terrain on your layout, you may experience unwanted uncoupling of your cars. They just don't look right. It was Bachmann's way of trying to cope with very tight radiuses. This last part is to remove the existing coupler system and install body-mounted KD coupler boxes and couplers. Bachmann's have a coupler box that is very sloppy along the vertical axis, as well as the coupler height. When the 2 cars or halves are separated and interiors removed, you will see the square truck top shaft and the metal shaft and linkage connector to the swivel coupler. This is the top of the truck, and then it has this arm connecting bar, and then this is a little arm that's on the coupler box. He's taken that linkage apart. He left this on. I suspect that's to keep the truck on. The new coupler box is mounted with a 256 screw, and he's showing the removed coupler box. He just installed this one just past the original hole. The original coupler journal shaft has 2 diameters. Keep the original coupler box and drill the hole in the car bottom large enough so the wider round part will move up higher and be glued permanently. Knock this assembly up before you do any modifications to get the correct coupler height. Do not glue prior to setting the coupler heights. I have a feeling he's speaking from experience. You could cut the protruding coupler journal piece flush from the bottom of the car and install a medium KD coupler in place. You may not have to cut this piece off and may be able to just file it down so it doesn't interfere with getting the new coupler box mounted flat and parallel to the chassis. this scratch tool. This looks like the metal wire one. You can see them in operation on the Watcom Skagit Model Railroad Club layout in Alger. It makes it nice not holding a flashlight or a headlamp. Happy modeling. And that's the end. Hopefully you learned something useful.